Just with Yeshua's statements in Matthew, we can understand a whole lot about how divorce works and when it is allowed. So the actual passage is in Matthew 19:3 through 9. You can read it there. Yeshua is asked two questions by the Pharisees. The first one, he answers with, a man will leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, and they will be one flesh, and what Yahweh has joined together, let not man put asunder. So what we have to know about there is, what is a wife? Because it says that the man cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh. They're a wife before they became one flesh. That's what it says. He's going to cleave to his wife, and then become one flesh. So there's something that happens that that makes them man and wife that comes before the one flesh. That is, in biblical terms, that's betrothal. We see that in the story of Joseph and Mary, where Mary is called Joseph's wife prior to them coming together. We see that in several statutes in the law given by Moses. It will say something like, when you're going to go out to war, if you've taken a wife, and if you have betrothed the wife, but not taken her, then you are ineligible for war. You got to go home and first take that wife before you will be allowed to go to war. Betrothal is when a woman first becomes the man's wife. The scriptural meaning of the word wife includes these wives who are a wife by covenant, but they haven't actually been one flesh. But anyway, Yeshua's first statement, it's talking about wives. It says, what Yahweh has joined together, let not man put asunder. These wives that have become one flesh, Yeshua says, don't let man put asunder. So here's our box of what a wife is. So we've got betrothal, B for betrothal, on one side. On the other side is a wife who has become one flesh. And according to Yeshua, if a wife has become one flesh, no putting asunder. So you can't divorce a wife that's one flesh, according to Yeshua's statement. The second question that he's asked, he answers with, whoever divorces his wife, except for the cause of fornication, causes her to commit adultery. It says in Matthew 5, and then in Matthew 19 it says that if he divorces her and marries another, that he commits adultery. So again, essentially what he says is you can divorce for fornication in Matthew 19. So what you have is, we'll have to divide wives again, the other direction, into innocent wives, not guilty of fornication, and there is some debate about the meaning of that word, so I'll just go innocent and guilty, or guilty, wife who is guilty of fornication. You can divorce the guilty wife, you cannot divorce innocent wives, so this is going to eliminate these again. So the only option left, that this divorce exception that Yeshua gives in his passage, this is the only time that even matches the qualifications just by the two statements of Yeshua in Matthew 19. Got to be betrothed, has to be guilty. Interestingly, that is the exact situation of Joseph and Mary, who, while they were still betrothed, Joseph was thinking about divorcing her. So this exactly matches up with what Yeshua says is when divorce is allowed. And Matthew chapter 1 and 2 actually talks about the story, and it says that Joseph was righteous. He was about to do a righteous divorce until he found out that she wasn't actually guilty. She was actually innocent, which meant that he couldn't divorce her. We actually see in Malachi chapter 2, we actually see some confirmations of this. So Malachi chapter 2, it says that you have a wife by covenant, which is, that's when betrothal starts, is when there's a covenant. And that did not Yahweh make them one. So again, we have that one flesh. And Malachi 2 then says, Yahweh hates that divorce. Don't deal treacherously with this wife. And we know that Yahweh is used in an analogy as having divorced Israel. So that's a different kind of divorce. That's a divorce that is before, that's a divorce of a guilty wife. Israel was guilty, and that was during a betrothal still. But when Malachi is saying there's a covenant, there's a one flesh, this is a full wife, he says Yahweh hates that divorce. So it's a different kind of divorce that Yahweh hates than this one. That's how there can be two different statements about it that still come out and mean the same thing. So we have a statute in the law that tells us that when a man seduces a virgin, so he sleeps with her, that he's then required to propose to her, basically, to make a covenant with her. And if and when he makes that covenant, this is in the opposite order, but he's now slept with her and he's made a covenant with her, the statute of that law says no divorce all his days. So in the law, if you do it this way, then it says no divorce. But again, you have both things. You have the one flesh, the physical relationship, and you have the covenant in the law. And again, Yeshua does the same thing. He says that if you have the one flesh and you have a covenant, this is all covenanted. If you have the one flesh and a covenant, that you can't divorce. So again, you're going to end up with this same. You have the law statute pointing out that if you have both in place, there's no divorce. You have Yeshua saying if they're both in place, you have no divorce. The only time you have it is when they're guilty and it's still during betrothal. And you have Malachi saying the same thing. So you have three places in the scripture all saying the same thing, that if you have made a covenant with a wife and you become one flesh with her, that there's no more divorce. That's across the whole scripture, the law and the prophets and Yeshua. They all say the same thing. At that point, there is no more divorce. Not a legitimate divorce. There's obviously a lot more to say about the topic of divorce. There's what does this guilty mean? There's what does it mean that she's guilty of fornication? There's examples of divorce in Ezra and Nehemiah. There's what 1 Corinthians says about wives leaving husbands or husbands leaving wives. So there's actually a lot more to this topic. I have both a podcast on my daringtheology.com website as well as an article that goes into many details on those things. This is just a quick overview that shows us that we can know really quick just from Matthew 19 that this is when divorce is allowed and it's not in any of these situations.